And just before we get on to audience questions, thank you. We've got a few coming already, and please do send in if you have anything you'd like to ask based on what we've been talking about, or something else as well. When you deal with morality, the chapter on morality, and the difficulty human beings have, and I presume also we see in the animal world, which is when something deviates from what is considered to be a societal norm. So first of all, what would you use as a good in terms of human behavior?
In terms of something that deviates,
Yeah, what from a societal norm? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a number of examples in the residential schools here in Canada, but like I used homophobia as the best example, because in the animal kingdom, there's plenty of research to show that like same-sex behavior of any kind, whether or not it's mating or just affection or raising a baby together, is fairly common, fairly widespread, from insects all the way up through mammals. We see it all over the place. And in no society in the animal world do we find that it's a problem. They're not punished for engaging in same-sex behavior, but humans do. And there are lots of places around the world historically and at the moment that will punish anything same-sex related for different reasons. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but they always sort of go back to it's different than it should be, or it's different than what you would normally see and expect. So humans are unique in wanting to punish something that is a pretty normal behavior, simply because it deviates from the norm. And that's into the question of, well, okay, well, how do we arrive at these moral conclusions about what is good and what is bad?
Is that do you think that as humans, is this a problem that there are still people who believe they have an access to an objective truth in perhaps in some ways as well, that we look at other species, and I think some people think that the way that we experience the world is the nearest to the objective truth, and the way that an ant experiences the world, or the way that something uses sonar experiences the world, or something with 8 eyes experiences the world, that is not the correct world, that we have a privileged position.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to think of that. I mean, we have privilege in that we have science, so we can find things in the world that are beyond our sensory systems. So yes, we do have privileged scientific information, but that's usually not related to morality. But the moral side about how the world really is and why it matters is usually based in some sort of faith, some supernatural ideology. And that is seemingly unique to our species, and is often the source and justification for moral positions of all kinds, some of which are good, many of which are very, very bad. There's so many moral positions you can rationalize yourself into using the moral framework based on your scripture or your God's beliefs, etc. That, if we look at it 100 years later, we're like, oh my God, that was terrible. We justified genocide, and we wouldn't do that anymore. More often than not, that's religious as opposed to secular beliefs, although secular societies reach bonkers conclusions as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, is that how often morality is actually basically used to just ensure power. We're seeing that in Uganda today with something that just went through the parliament there, and I think we're seeing it UK, US, Hungary, all over the place at the moment. We've got the first few questions coming. Now, this is Carmen would like to know. She says, "I'm sure I can hear the hum every night when it's quiet of the universe, known as the Om in Hinduism. Do you think I'm hearing this, or am I nuts?" And I don't think you're nuts, by the way. I think that's a very interesting, because again, I think so much of our experience of the world is subjective, and that sometimes we pick up on things, and part of that is the creativity of our imagination, which makes the world a richer place. I wonder what your reaction to that is, Justin.
To hearing the hum of the universe and whether or not you're nuts? No, it depends on what you define as nuts. Like if you're a functional contributing member of society that is harming no one and providing help, then you're probably cool. If your daily life is not bothered by the hum. So whether or not, I guess your question is like, whether or not is that hum real? Well, then we get into this question of, well, what is real? Like you say, our perceptual sensory systems are specific to our species and often specific to our individuals. So what is that hum in your life? Are you the person who can hear the hum of the universe? It's entirely possible. So I don't think it's crazy. I think it's fine. It would be crazy if you then killed your neighbor because they couldn't hear the hum. That would be bad.
See, I think that's a very, again, going back to the William Blake thing, one of the things that I love about William Blake is that he could have different levels of experience, and some of them were entirely true, but he also accepted they were only true for him. So he knew that the angels were in the tree, but he wouldn't persuade you that you could see them because he knew that the angels weren't in the tree for you. And I think, being able to lose that level of tribalism, being able to just go, well, hang on a minute, I am experiencing this, but I don't have to persuade everyone else that it's reality because it's mine.
Gosh, yes, that is beautiful. And I wish it was more like that. But it's, when you walk through the streets of a city and you've got 20 people proselytizing and telling you what you need to believe, it gets pretty exhausting.
Yeah. This is from John. John says, could you share some of your thoughts on the intelligence of an octopus? For some, they are the closest thing to an intelligent alien we will ever encounter, with arms, with their own semi-independent intelligence, and yet they have no theory of mind, perhaps no phenomenal consciousness. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, octopuses are a fantastic example, exactly because they have this sort of, multifaceted neuronal system. They don't have like a single brain doing all this stuff. They have a lot of neurons in their arms which operate independently, which is weird. So how are they able to create their form of intelligence through this bizarre system? That's a great question. Also, they're not a particularly social species, and most species that we consider intelligent are very social, like ravens and crows and humans, dolphins, etc. So that's weird. So how is it that they're so good at solving problems and doing, like I was talking about before, that deceptive behavior that you see in cuttlefish? How are they so good at that? Where did their intelligence come from? It's a great question. And then the question of whether or not they are conscious, self-aware, that has not been answered. There's certainly a lot of people who would argue that they have a level of awareness and consciousness which would rival dolphins and humans, etc.
Now, we'll count the next one as the Voltaire question. Would Justin say he's a misanthrope? So, yeah, I'm interested. I don't know exactly where this has come from, but it's, and would he say that misanthropy is necessarily a bad thing?
Depending on the day, I would consider myself a misanthrope for sure. But that's mostly just me complaining about the guy in front of me, at the grocery store who's taking forever to pull change out of his purse or whatever. But most of the time, no. If you look at my regular everyday behavior, I'm quite nice to people and empathic. So I'm only misanthropic in an intellectual kind of way. But in my daily life, I'm quite a good thrope, a euthropic person. I don't know what kind of person that would be. But then the bigger question is like, is humankind good or bad? Well, then there's a whole different conversation. So I'd say, well, humanity might be bad for itself and the planet, but that's a different kind of misanthropy.
Yeah, euthropic is that definitely has, I think, the makings of a third but Ulysses and euthropism, something like that. I'm sure there's
it sounds like a kind of bladder infection. I'm not sure whether euthropic, it doesn't sound good.
I think that perhaps misanthropes as well, sometimes it may be a bladder issue as well. It may even be something Freudian that leads to misanthropy. We'll work this out when we co-write the book together, Justin.
Okay, great.
This question, I'm not going to name for this one, but how do you want the world to change in response to your book? So what's the hope you have of an audience's reaction?
I really want people to give your average animal more credit for being smarter and therefore worth more than you normally would. So whether or not that's like an insect or your house cat or whatever animal you bump across, I would just love you to be like, okay, maybe they're not as smart as a human, but maybe being a human kind of smart is bad. So this cat is more valuable than my uncle, for example. Ugh, that's a weird example, but you know what I mean. This cat has value. I like my uncles. They're great. I don't know why I threw them under the bus. I was going to say father-in-law, but that'd be worse. Giving them more credit for being functional, good members of the universe. That's what I want.
I think we found out what euthropic means. I think it's something about an unconscious fear or dislike of your uncle.
So that sounds Freudian again. Everything
it's always Freud. Yeah. We'll get on to Jungian things in a minute. I'm sure there'll be a question about flying saucers or something like that. Carmen would like to know, who do you find your most inspiring scientist? And also, what are you reading from your tidy bookshelf behind you? She's very impressed by your bookshelf.
Oh, thank you. That's it's heavily curated. My actual book reading pile is about 17 books next to my bed and on the floor. And what am I reading? I'm reading Neuromancer. You know that book, Neuromancer, Simon?
William Gibson.
Yeah, and I'd never
Yeah.
read it, so I need to know the origins of, like, all the Matrix and whatnot. So that's what I'm currently reading. What was the other part of the question?
Do you have a scientist that's particularly inspired you?
I think Franz de Waal. I think of all the scientists, his writing has been it's great. He's been very influential in my field of study as well. Like, a lot of his research is relevant to what I'm doing, and I love him as a communicator. He's been a really great science communicator. So I think Franz de Waal. He's definitely my top pick. Although Carl Sagan, great love him.
Franz de Waal wasn't one of his first books on chimpanzee politics.
Yeah, and that was like, it was very popular, but it was popular in like the U.S. Congress, where people were like using it to justify being terrible to each other or good. I'm not sure. So yeah, he got a lot of clout that way, but chimpanzee politics was a pretty big deal at the time.
Our next question is, to what extent do you think our human perception of animal intelligence has been biased by our desire to protect ourselves from moral responsibility towards animals?
1000%, because we do all sorts of terrible things to animals. And so it's kind of hard to do a bad thing, a violent, mean thing to an animal if you also give it the same moral or intellectual worth as like a human child. So you have to place them in different categories, which allow that, you have to build up a bit of a wall sometimes when you're looking at animal behavior, so that you don't, so that you can protect yourself from the way that you treat them. That's a common, I think, a very common thing. And I love this, the legislation in the United States, for example, where you have all these animals that are used in research still, like lab rats and whatnot. And the way they get around this problem is that they do not classify them as animals. So no animal welfare laws apply to animals used in experiments. So that's how they get around the moral issue, by weird legal wrangling. So yeah, it changes the way we investigate them and which species we look at.
John would like to know if you think that life on Earth would benefit from human extinction.
I mean, is there a doubt? I feel like that's pretty straightforward. Like, if we were, like, we've caused so much damage and it just to extinction for the animals right now and in the future, I would imagine that there'd probably be more, but depending on how you frame that, you cannot argue anything other than there would be more biodiversity if we were not here. That has to be a truism.
The Fermi paradox. Discuss. So if for those who don't know, if intelligent life is out in the universe, how come it hasn't got in contact with us then? Is a brief half-assed summary of that. What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, I love that in the early days of SETI, when they were working on how to contact animals or whatever, or aliens, it was all about radio signals. They're like, we'll find radio signals. But if you think about the history of our own species, I don't know, we've been around 250,000 years. Like, we did radio for a few decades, but now we're switching over to other stuff. We're not even using radio for communication anymore. We're certainly not sending out very far signals to try and communicate. So, like, if you're attempting to find aliens by looking for radio signals, that's just dumb, because that's probably not how they're communicating with us or other things. So maybe that's the nature of the paradox. I don't know. Also, why would they want to contact? Maybe there are other species that are happy being left alone, like misanthropes like me. I'd rather be left alone.
That's what I've always wondered, that bit that you could have a creature that's both curious and satisfied enough at the same time that it goes, let's just stay here and make it nice. We don't have to escape from here.
That's exactly it. Like, maybe they just have a beautiful functioning society. They don't need external validation by having some aliens show up and be like, oh, you guys are doing a good job. Maybe they're just happy. Maybe that's the answer to the paradox. Aliens are happy.
As you're on science fiction, by the way, reading Neuromancer, have you read Roadside Picnic?
No. Is it good?
Just on this, Igor and Boris Strugatsky, and the starting point of that is the aliens, right? They visit the Earth, but they don't even notice us. They literally pull in, use us as a lay-by to have their picnic, leave all their rubbish out the window, which of course is way beyond the technology that we have, and create all these strange zones. If you would, when you finish Neuromancer, if you're looking for another science fiction, I highly recommend Igor and Boris Strugatsky.
That's great. I'll put it on the pile.
Make it 18 books tonight. I'm glad that we have. Leonie wonders, do you think your book risks bringing humans down too much?
Nope, I don't think so, because I don't know what that would actually be. I don't think anyone is starting a new religion based on my book where they are justifying extinguishing other people. I think that we're in for a bit of a humbling when it comes to the nature of our intelligence. And there's hope in the book in that, like, yes, maybe our intelligence is dangerous, but knowing that will allow us to make better decisions and be better people and better to the planet. So I think it's okay. It's okay to go down a few pegs. I'm not too worried that we're going to go too far. Plus, I mean, when has humanity ever gone too far down those ladders to say like, insects are better than us? That's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like those moments where they go, I'm a little bit worried that everyone's become too equal. And then you kind of look out the window and you go, no, I think there's a lot of work to be done. But I have to say with the book, I didn't feel like that at all. I really felt, I love the fact that it makes so many connections all the time. I think that sense of having a greater connection to all living things and in different ways, and being able to think, when you look at different creatures as well, thinking about somewhere on a tree we have a shared common ancestor, and you can even include sunflowers or whatever in that. I think that actually, if anything, gives a stronger desire to preserve all living things.
I think you're right, because we no longer are like different from the rest of the world. This has been a common problem. We are outside of the natural world. This is saying like, no, we're all part of it, and we're not even the best part of it. We're just part of it. I think that's only helpful.
And we got one more, which is, we've got a few more. I don't think we're going to get through all the questions. I apologize for that. But we've got one, which is, you talked at the start about dolphin science beginning in the ridiculous and unscientific work of John Lilly. Who are the other wacky and fun figures in animal cognition studies? Now, also, we should say that when we were talking about John C. Lilly, that there is also an importance sometimes in maverick scientists and scientists that might seem quite eccentric, because they can sometimes be the drive that sometimes you have to do something which can seem quite absurd to then return to go, hang on, this is an area to explore.
It's true. And John Lilly's work ended up being wacky in some of the things that he did, but his general ideas, this idea that dolphins have exceptionally large brains and maybe they're smart, that's more or less been true since he first was writing about it. So he really did create the field of dolphin cognition, our interest in them as something other than just weird fish, as potentially really intelligent mammals. So yeah, he was both, a bit wackadoodle toward the end, but his ideas were sound. And even the experiments in the 60s of trying to teach dolphins English, it sounds insane now, but it's totally what all scientists were doing at the time with chimpanzees or whatnot. It just sounds weird with dolphins. So yeah, there's so many. I mean, if you think about it, like, who are the guys who determined that the Heliobacter was the cause of ulcers? So they
yeah. I had him on a show once. Yeah. He's yeah.
Like, that's crazy. Like, siphoning off someone's gastric juices, drinking it to prove that you're right. Like, that you just put that person in the category of nuts, but also brilliant. So sometimes nuts and brilliant go hand in hand.
Yeah, he's so good. We had him on a show, and I was quite surprised. I expected him to be like the kind of Crocodile Dundee of Nobel Prize winners, but he's a very calm and quiet person, save for the neon T-shirt, which expresses his award-winning ideas. That's the one bit allowed there is. We've got a nice short question for the end. What makes us human?
Our DNA, I guess.
Great. I knew you'd find a way of doing a short, because that really, this is like that's how every single one of the How to Academy conversations start. Let's just get a couple of things covered. First of all, let's just work out what does make us human. Many years later, the single Zoom broadcast ticked on. Justin, your book is excellent. So it's If Nietzsche Were a Narwhal, it's available now, and it has, I mean, there's so much we could have touched on there. And as you said, the cuttlefish story goes in many places. There's not merely one crow in this as well. There's a jackdaw, I think, somewhere in here. It might not be a jackdaw. I can't remember which one it was. There was, anyway, there's a lot about humanity, a lot about philosophy. And there is a lot, what I like about it is you finish each chapter in a position of contemplation. I don't merely mean you, but I mean, as a reader, it changes the world that you see.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I didn't want to provide answers. I just wanted to provide more questions and weird anecdotes.
I love that. There was, I can't remember who it was who told me a lovely story of, again, another Nobel Prize winning physicist who felt that the reason he'd ended up there was every day that he got back from school, his mother would say, "Did you ask any good questions?" I think that's a great
Exactly.
philosophy.
I love it.
Justin, have a wonderful day in Nova Scotia. Everyone, highly recommend this book. Do check out what's coming up on How To Academy soon. There's always loads of stuff. And I think also there's going to be a return to, well, I think they've already returned actually, live events as well. So not really, I mean, this is live, but what I mean is that you actually turn up and you see they're not really AI creations of us, which of course we have actually been all along during this long period of lockdown that also led to all of these. So thank you very much. Thank you to the How To Academy. And thank you most of all to Justin.
Well,
Bye-bye.
thank you for having me. Bye-bye, everybody.